The body, Cayce would often say, is like a garden. It holds within it the power to bloom with vitality or to wither under neglect. Picture it, a lush green expanse where every leaf is vibrant, every stem is strong, and the air carries the scent of life itself. Or, if care is forgotten, a patch of dry, brittle stems where soil cracks and dust replaces the fragrance of flowers. This garden is not somewhere outside. It is the living ecosystem beneath your skin, in every cell, every drop of blood, every breath you take. If you believe that chronic illness is simply a matter of fate, age, or bad luck, perhaps today is the moment to look again. Edgar Cayce, the man often called the sleeping prophet, saw the body differently. In hundreds of readings given while in a trance state, he described the invisible currents that sustain our health and the subtle imbalances that can undermine it. These weren't mystical abstractions for him. They were as real as the soil beneath a gardener's feet. He spoke of pH balance, of acid and alkaline states within the body, decades before such terms became common in health discussions. To Cayce, most disease did not begin with germs or genetics, but with a gradual disturbance in the body's internal chemistry. Too much acidity, too little alkalinity. This imbalance, he said, created a breeding ground for inflammation, poor circulation, and the slow erosion of the body's natural defenses. And like a wise gardener tending to the soil before planting seeds, Cayce believed that restoring this balance was the foundation for lasting health. Imagine the blood as a river flowing through your body, carrying nutrients, oxygen, and messages from one cell to another. When that river runs clear and at the right chemical balance, life thrives. When it turns murky and acidic, the banks begin to erode. Tissues become inflamed and the quiet hum of life is disrupted. Cayce saw this not as an inevitable decay, but as something you could change by choosing what you place on your plate and into your cup. This was the heart of his guidance. Build a diet in which fresh fruits and vegetables make up the vast majority, about 80%, and the remaining 20% can be proteins, grains, and other foods. Limit red meat. Avoid refined sugar. Steer clear of fried foods and processed snacks that clog the river rather than nourish it. Drink pure water often, not just to quench thirst, but to flush away the sediment of toxins that collect in the stream. It wasn't only about avoiding disease. Cayce saw the alkaline state as a condition where the body's own repair systems awaken. In such an environment, inflammation recedes, circulation improves, and the cells have the resources to do what they were designed to do: heal, rebuild, and defend. This was not a promise of immortality, but a reminder of possibility. The body is built to recover, if given the right conditions. Now, you may be wondering how such an idea could have come to Cayce in the early 20th century, long before wellness influencers and health bloggers talked about alkaline diets. In his view, it wasn't about trends. It was about listening to the quiet whispers of the body before they became cries for help, listening to the patterns of nature, where balance is always sought, and life is nurtured in harmony. As you hear these words, you might begin to sense your own body differently. Not just as flesh and bone, but as living soil, rich with potential. You might recall the last time you felt truly well, not just free from illness, but brimming with energy, clear in mind, light in spirit. That feeling, Cayce believed, is not gone forever. It is simply waiting beneath the surface, like seeds lying dormant, ready to sprout when the environment is right. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment and notice where you are right now, perhaps at your kitchen table or walking in the park. or sitting quietly in your room. Leave a comment to share where and when you're listening, and if this vision of the body as a garden resonates with you. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next steps on this journey into Edgar Cayce's healing wisdom. Because what comes next is not just history. It's a bridge. A bridge from Cayce's trance readings to the scientific language of today. A bridge from abstract health advice to something you can taste, touch, and practice daily. And, as you'll soon discover, it's a bridge anyone can cross, no matter where they are starting from. Cayce often spoke of illness as a seed planted quietly, long before symptoms bloom. In his view, the root of most chronic disease was not the virus, the bacteria, or the bad luck that people often blamed. It was the slow and silent tilting of the body's chemical balance toward acidity. He described this imbalance not with the clinical detachment of a laboratory scientist, but with the sensitivity of someone watching a storm gather on the horizon. The clouds do not burst immediately. They thicken, darken, and shift the air long before the first drop of rain. In the same way, Cayce believed, the chemistry of the blood and tissues changes gradually, setting the stage for disease long before we name it. The concept of acid-alkaline balance in the body is now often framed in terms of pH, a scale from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral. Values below 7 are acidic, above 7, alkaline. Cayce spoke of this balance in plain words. Acidity meant congestion, inflammation, and vulnerability. Alkalinity meant clarity, circulation, and strength. He taught that while the body naturally maintains a tightly regulated blood pH, the foods we eat and the lifestyle we live can make the tissues and fluids lean toward one state or the other. When acidity dominates, he said, waste products linger, circulation slows, and inflammation simmers beneath the surface. Joints may begin to ache, digestion may become sluggish, skin may lose its glow. These are the whispers, the early warnings. Left unchecked, they can deepen into the chronic conditions so many people now accept as part of aging: arthritis, cardiovascular disease, persistent fatigue, digestive disorders. Cayce's perspective was radical for his time because it placed responsibility and power back in the hands of the individual. If imbalance could be created over time through diet and habits, it could also be corrected over time through conscious choices. That shift in thinking was transformative. It reframed disease from an inevitable curse to a preventable and often reversible condition. He observed that many of the foods most common in the American diet of his era, and even more so today, were strongly acid-forming. Red meats, especially in large quantities, tended to leave acidic residues in the body after digestion. Refined sugars and white flour products, stripped of their natural minerals, pushed the chemistry further toward acidity. Fried foods, heavy fats, and overly processed snacks acted like debris in a river, slowing the flow and inviting stagnation. But diet was not the only player. Cayce also noted that stress, lack of rest, and insufficient physical activity could tip the scale toward acidity, even in someone who ate reasonably well. The nervous system, when overworked, sent signals throughout the body that tightened vessels, slowed elimination, and altered digestion. In his readings, he urged people not only to eat differently, but to live differently, breathing deeper, resting more fully, moving with purpose each day. It's important to understand that Cayce did not demonize all acid-forming foods. The body, after all, requires balance, and some degree of acidity is necessary for functions like digestion. His message was about proportion. Just as a gardener knows that a plant needs both sunlight and shade, Cayce urged his listeners to create a dietary pattern where alkalinity was the dominant influence, roughly 4 parts alkaline-forming foods to 1 part acid-forming foods. He saw this balance as the key to a terrain where disease struggles to take hold. In a body leaning toward alkalinity, inflammation subsides, oxygen circulates freely, and nutrients are delivered efficiently to the places they are needed most. In such an environment, healing is not a battle. It is the natural state. For Cayce, these insights did not come from reading the latest medical journals. They emerged from the peculiar space he entered in his sleep-like trances, where he could speak to the conditions of a person's body as though walking through its inner landscapes. In this state, he described blockages in the lymphatic system, congestion in the liver, or a sluggishness in the intestinal tract, all signs, he said, of a chemistry leaning too far into acidity. He urged people to see their health not as a series of emergencies to be managed, but as a living balance to be maintained daily. That required awareness, discipline, and a willingness to question habits so ingrained they felt natural. Why begin the day with coffee and white toast, when a fresh fruit salad and a glass of water could set a completely different tone? Why reach for a heavy dinner of fried meat and potatoes, when a colorful plate of steamed vegetables and whole grains could nourish without burdening? The remarkable thing about Cayce's advice is how much of it modern science has echoed. Today, research links chronic low-grade inflammation, a byproduct of many acid-forming diets, to conditions ranging from heart disease to diabetes to autoimmune disorders. The language has evolved, but the underlying truth is the same. A balanced internal environment supports resilience, while a consistently acidic state erodes it. If you've never thought about your health in terms of acid and alkaline before, it can feel like stepping into a new landscape. But as we move forward, you'll see how the 80-20 principle that Cayce championed becomes a simple compass in this territory, one that can guide your meals, your habits, and your long-term well-being without the confusion of endless fad diets. And that 80-20 compass, how to hold it steady and why it works, is exactly where our journey is headed next. Cayce was never vague when it came to identifying the foods that, in his view, worked against the body's balance. He called them enemies of balance, not because they were inherently evil, but because they tipped the inner scale toward acidity faster than the body could correct it. Over time, he observed, these foods acted like steady drops of ink in a glass of clear water, slowly clouding the system until clarity was lost. At the top of his caution list was red meat, particularly when eaten in large portions or too frequently. While a small amount of lean beef or lamb could be tolerated in some cases, Cayce saw repeated overindulgence as taxing to digestion and circulation. Red meat, once broken down, left acidic byproducts that lingered in the tissues, slowing elimination and encouraging what he described as sluggishness in the bloodstream. Next came refined sugar, which he regarded as one of the most disruptive substances to the body's natural chemistry. Sugar, stripped of its natural fiber and minerals, entered the bloodstream rapidly, spiking energy and then dropping it just as quickly. This volatility, he believed, disturbed not only physical vitality but also emotional balance, feeding cycles of craving and fatigue. Fried foods were another culprit. The combination of overheated oils and heavy batter, Cayce noted, created a residue in the body that was difficult to process. He likened it to pouring thick sludge into a river. Eventually, the flow's impeded, and stagnant pockets form where waste accumulates. This stagnation, in his view, became fertile ground for inflammation and illness. Highly processed foods, those stripped of their natural form, altered with chemical preservatives, or packed with artificial flavors, were also on his list. He observed that the more a food was removed from its original state, the less it carried the life-giving tones that nourish the body. These artificial additions, he said, often demanded more from the body than they offered in return, draining rather than replenishing. Cayce's warnings weren't just about what to avoid, but about the cumulative effect of these foods. One indulgent meal might not cause harm, but a diet built on such choices day after day could shift the body's environment decisively toward acidity. Over months and years, this shift would manifest in the chronic complaints people brought to him: aching joints, recurring infections, digestive discomfort, low energy, and mental fog. He often advised that when such foods were eaten, they should be balanced immediately with alkaline-forming choices. A small serving of meat might be accompanied by a generous portion of leafy greens. A dessert might be followed by a cleansing glass of water and fresh fruit later in the day. The idea was not to live under constant restriction, but to remain conscious of how each choice shaped the body's chemistry. Modern science, decades later, would validate much of this caution. Red and processed meats are now linked to higher risks of certain cancers and heart disease. Excessive sugar consumption is recognized as a driver of obesity, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. Fried and heavily processed foods are understood to promote systemic inflammation. The language has changed, but the message echoes Cayce's insight. The foods we choose daily can either build our health or quietly undermine it. But Cayce's emphasis went beyond nutrients and biochemistry. He often spoke of the vibrations of food, the subtle qualities that, while not measured in a lab, were felt in the body's energy and spirit. Fresh, living foods carried vitality because they were close to the source. Overly processed or denatured foods, in contrast, carried little life force, leaving the body undernourished on a deeper level. To follow his guidance was to think beyond calories and grams, and instead to ask, does this food help my inner river flow clear? Does it leave my inner garden nourished or depleted? Such questions turn eating into an act of awareness, not just habit. For those who sought his help, avoiding these enemies of balance was often the hardest part, because it meant confronting comfort foods and lifelong routines. Cayce understood this. He encouraged gradual change, replacing one acidic habit with an alkaline one, week by week, so that the body, mind, and taste buds could adjust together. And just as important as removing harmful elements was adding in the purest, simplest medicine of all, water. Because, as Cayce saw it, even the most balanced diet needed this constant, cleansing current to keep the inner river from growing stagnant. That is where we turn next. To Cayce, water was never just a drink. It was medicine in its most elemental form, pure, simple, and without side effects. He saw it as the river that keeps every part of the body nourished and cleansed, the medium through which nutrients travel and waste is carried away. Without adequate water, he believed, even the most carefully chosen foods could not deliver their full benefit, because the inner current that moves life through the body would slow to a trickle. He urged people to drink pure water, meaning water free from contamination, chemicals, or stagnation. In his time, this meant well water from a trusted source or water that had been properly filtered. He warned that impure water could introduce toxins faster than the body could eliminate them, burdening the very systems it was meant to help. Today, that advice feels even more relevant with modern concerns about microplastics, industrial pollutants, and heavy metals in municipal supplies. Cayce was specific about how to drink water. He recommended sipping throughout the day rather than gulping large amounts at once. This steady intake, he said, allowed the body to absorb and use the water more effectively, keeping the bloodstream well hydrated and the elimination channels active. He often suggested starting the day with a glass of pure water before any food or drink to wake up the organs of elimination and set the body's chemistry in motion. He also spoke of water as a partner to the alkaline diet. Fresh fruits and vegetables bring water in their own right, what he called living water, bound within the structure of the plant and carrying its minerals. This natural hydration, combined with pure drinking water, worked together to maintain the fluid balance that supported circulation, digestion, and temperature regulation. The connection between water and alkalinity was, for Cayce, more than symbolic. In his readings, he described how well-hydrated tissues allow for the efficient transport of alkaline minerals like potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Without enough water, even a mineral-rich diet could fail to produce the desired balance. Dehydrated tissues, he said, become like parched earth, less flexible, less able to absorb nutrients, and more prone to irritation and inflammation. Water, in his view, was also a gentle detoxifier. He encouraged people to think of each sip as a small cleansing act, washing away acidic waste products before they could accumulate. This wasn't a flush in the harsh sense, but a quiet, continuous maintenance, more like a gardener watering plants daily than a sudden downpour. Modern physiology supports much of this idea. Adequate hydration is known to help the kidneys filter waste, regulate blood pressure, and maintain the balance of electrolytes. It supports the lymphatic system, which Cayce often mentioned as a key player in immune health. Without enough water, waste products can linger, pH balance can shift, and energy levels can drop. Yet Cayce's perspective went beyond mechanics. He considered water a carrier of life force, capable of transmitting subtle energies from the environment into the body. He advised those he counseled to drink water in a state of calm, even gratitude, believing that our mental state could influence how the body received and used what it was given. He also linked water intake to circulation, a theme we will see more deeply in the next part of this journey. When the body is well hydrated, the blood flows more freely, carrying oxygen and nutrients with ease. When the inner river slows, circulation can become sluggish, and the conditions for inflammation, one of the great obstacles to health, begin to take root. For Cayce, the glass of water in your hand was never trivial. It was part of the same story as the garden within you, the same story as the balance of acid and alkali. And just as a river shapes the land it moves through, water shapes the terrain of your health in ways you feel every day, sometimes without even realizing it. And so, with water flowing clearly in the mind, we come to a central piece of Cayce's vision: how restoring pH balance and supporting circulation can quiet inflammation and open the way for lasting health. In Cayce's view, the story of health was inseparable from the story of circulation. He often described the body as a network of streams and tributaries, each carrying life to the furthest reaches of the landscape. When these channels were open and clear, vitality reached every cell. When they became sluggish, the terrain shifted toward stagnation, and with stagnation came inflammation, the quiet fire at the root of so many chronic conditions. Cayce linked poor circulation directly to an overly acidic internal environment. In his readings, he would speak of congested areas where the blood did not flow freely, or of sluggish lymphatic movement that left tissues starved of oxygen and overloaded with waste. In such places, he said, the body's natural defenses could not work efficiently, and irritation would simmer until it became a more serious disorder. He believed that when the body leaned toward alkalinity through the 80-20 diet, through adequate hydration, and through mindful living, circulation naturally improved. Alkaline-forming foods, rich in minerals and antioxidants, supported the elasticity of blood vessels, kept the blood less viscous, and encouraged the smooth movement of fluids. In turn, this reduced the strain on the heart and eased the burden on organs of elimination. Inflammation, in Cayce's language, was not simply an enemy to be fought. It was a signal, a red flag that something in the body's chemistry had drifted out of harmony. He warned against suppressing symptoms without addressing the cause, comparing it to painting over rust. The rust, he said, would continue to spread beneath the surface unless the conditions that created it were changed. One of the most common patterns he saw was a loop. Acidic conditions leading to poor circulation leading to inflammation, and inflammation deepening the acidic state. Breaking that loop required more than medicine. It required restoring the body's terrain so that the loop could not restart. That restoration began with the daily choice of foods and habits. In practical terms, Cayce encouraged gentle movement to complement dietary changes. Walking in the fresh air, mild stretching, or light calisthenics, all, in his eyes, were ways of keeping the inner rivers moving. He viewed exercise not as punishment for the body, but as a form of circulation therapy, aiding in the delivery of nutrients and the removal of waste. From a modern perspective, the connection between pH balance, circulation, and inflammation is being studied more closely. While blood pH is tightly regulated, the acid-alkaline effects in tissues can influence vascular function. Diets rich in plant foods have been shown to support endothelial health, the lining of blood vessels, and to reduce markers of chronic inflammation. Adequate hydration keeps blood volume stable, while certain alkaline-forming minerals help relax vessel walls, improving flow. Cayce's insight, however, was that this improvement was not just physical. It was also felt in the clarity of the mind and the lift of the spirit. Good circulation brought not only physical nourishment, but also a sense of lightness and readiness. People often reported feeling more alive after adopting his recommendations, a sign that the effects were reaching deeper than the physical tissues. He was also realistic. Not every chronic condition would vanish overnight. But he believed that by consistently supporting circulation and reducing inflammation, people could slow, halt, or even reverse the progression of many illnesses. Over time, these changes could restore not only physical function, but also the confidence that one's body could be trusted again. As you picture this network of rivers within you, consider how each choice, each bite, each sip, each movement, either clears the channels or clogs them. Cayce wanted people to see that their health was not a mystery locked away in a doctor's office, but a living system they could influence every day. And with that vision in mind, it's time to step into Cayce's kitchen to see how these principles take shape in something you can hold on a fork, savor in your mouth, and feel in your body from the very first meal. If Cayce's philosophy could be distilled into an image, it might be a kitchen table set with foods that seem both humble and alive. Colors bright, textures crisp, scents fresh from the earth. He believed that what we choose to prepare in our kitchens is not simply fuel for the body, but the foundation of its inner climate. And so, to make his ideas real, we can step into what might be called a day in the Cayce kitchen. The morning begins quietly. Before any bite is taken, a tall glass of pure water greets the body like the first light of dawn on a garden. It rinses away the remnants of the night, wakes up the organs of elimination, and prepares the bloodstream for the nutrients to come. For breakfast, Cayce often favored fruits, fresh, ripe, and varied. A bowl of sliced melon, apples, and berries might sit beside a wedge of whole grain toast spread with almond butter. This meal is light, but rich in alkaline-forming minerals, fiber, and natural hydration. The fruits bring living water. The whole grain provides a slow, steady energy. In colder months, a warm oatmeal topped with fresh berries and a drizzle of honey could take the place of the melon, still keeping the balance toward alkalinity. Mid-morning, if hunger stirs, the answer is simple: more fruit or a handful of raw nuts. The aim is to nourish without tipping the inner scale toward acidity. Cayce would have encouraged mindful eating here, pausing to actually taste the food, chew slowly, and let digestion begin in the mouth. Lunch, in the Cayce style, is often the largest and most varied meal of the day. Imagine a plate where steamed vegetables take center stage: broccoli, carrots, green beans, lightly cooked to preserve their vitality. Alongside them, a generous salad of leafy greens, cucumbers, and tomatoes, dressed with olive oil and lemon juice. The protein might be a small portion of grilled fish or baked chicken, seasoned with herbs rather than heavy sauces. Whole grain bread or a modest serving of brown rice rounds out the plate. Here, the 80-20 balance is obvious. The alkaline foods dominate, while the acid-forming foods are present but restrained. In the afternoon, should energy waver, Cayce would suggest a cleansing beverage. Perhaps warm water with a slice of lemon or a fresh vegetable juice made from celery, carrot, and beet. The aim is not just to snack, but to refresh the body's chemistry, maintaining the clear flow of the inner river. Dinner, in his view, should be the lightest meal. A hearty soup of vegetables and legumes, served with a small salad, offers warmth without burdening digestion overnight. If protein is included, it might be a small piece of fish or a boiled egg, but never the heavy roasts or fried dishes that can linger in the stomach and disrupt rest. Cayce believed that sleep was a time for repair, not for wrestling with undigested food. Throughout the day, pure water remains the silent companion. Sipped slowly, it keeps the system hydrated and supports the gentle elimination of acidic waste. Even the order in which foods are eaten had a place in Cayce's thinking. Fruits, for example, were best taken alone or before other foods, so they could pass through the stomach quickly without fermenting. Leafy greens and non-starchy vegetables could be combined freely, but heavy starches and proteins were better kept in modest portions and balanced by the alkaline bulk of the plate. This daily pattern was not meant to feel restrictive. In fact, many found it freeing because it replaced the confusion of countless diet rules with a clear, consistent principle. Once the 80-20 ratio became second nature, meals could be adapted to the seasons, to personal preferences, and even to special occasions without losing the underlying balance. Cayce's kitchen was a place where food was respected not only for its taste, but for its effect on the inner terrain. Each meal was an opportunity to cultivate that inner garden, to clear the streams, to choose vitality over congestion. But Cayce's wisdom did not exist in a vacuum. In the decades since his readings, science has examined these patterns with microscopes and clinical trials. And in many ways, modern research has been catching up to what Cayce intuited long ago. That intersection, where prophecy meets evidence, is where we turn next. Cayce's ideas about diet and pH balance might once have sounded unconventional, even mystical. Yet, as nutrition science matured, many of his core principles began to find parallels in research conducted decades after his readings. What he spoke of as alkaline-forming foods, modern scientists would later examine in terms of their mineral content, antioxidant properties, and effects on inflammation. The language was different, but the underlying patterns often aligned. One area of agreement lies in the role of plant-based foods in supporting long-term health. Studies now confirm that diets rich in fruits, vegetables, and whole plant foods are associated with lower risks of cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, and metabolic disorders. Researchers note that these foods provide potassium, magnesium, and other minerals that help maintain the body's acid-base equilibrium at the tissue level. They also deliver phytonutrients that reduce oxidative stress, a concept that mirrors Cayce's belief in reducing the irritation within the body's systems. The modern understanding of inflammation also echoes Cayce's warnings about acidic conditions. We now know that chronic low-grade inflammation is a central factor in the development of many long-term illnesses, from arthritis to diabetes. Acid-forming diets, heavy in refined sugars, processed meats, and fried foods are linked to elevated inflammatory markers in the blood. In contrast, the alkaline-forming diets Cayce recommended tend to reduce these markers, supporting immune resilience and cellular repair. Hydration, another cornerstone of Cayce's approach, has been validated repeatedly. Adequate water intake supports kidney function, assists in nutrient transport, and helps regulate blood pressure, all consistent with his vision of a clear-flowing inner river. Even his advice to start the day with water is supported by research showing that morning hydration can improve alertness, metabolism, and digestion. There's also growing recognition of how dietary patterns affect circulation. High intake of plant foods and healthy fats from sources like olive oil can improve endothelial function, the health of the lining of blood vessels, while excessive saturated fat, trans fats, and refined carbohydrates can impair it. Cayce's emphasis on limiting heavy meats and fried foods and replacing them with lighter, plant-rich meals is in step with these findings. Even his guidance on food combinations, once dismissed as overly simplistic, has a kernel of scientific sense. Fruits consumed separately digest more quickly, reducing the likelihood of fermentation and bloating. Large, protein-heavy meals at night can indeed disrupt sleep quality, as the body's energy is diverted to digestion rather than rest and repair. It's worth noting that science has also refined some aspects of his views. The body's blood pH is tightly regulated and doesn't shift dramatically with diet. However, diet can influence the pH of urine and, more importantly, the mineral balance and inflammatory status of tissues, factors that may contribute to the sensations of sluggishness or vitality that Cayce described. In other words, while the exact mechanism may differ from his explanations, the effects he observed can still be explained in physiological terms. What makes Cayce's dietary vision so compelling is not that he anticipated every modern discovery, but that his recommendations form a coherent lifestyle pattern, one that science has increasingly endorsed piece by piece. His call for 80% plant-based meals, avoidance of heavily processed and fried foods, regular hydration, and mindful eating aligns closely with the principles found in many modern longevity and anti-inflammatory diets. This convergence is powerful. It shows that wisdom can emerge from different paths, one from trance readings in the early 20th century, another from data and peer-reviewed studies in the 21st. When the two meet, they reinforce one another, creating a bridge between intuition and evidence. Standing on that bridge, it becomes easier to see why Cayce's guidance still resonates today. It's not just an artifact of his era. It's a living framework that can be applied, tested, and refined in modern life. And for those ready to begin, the next step is to take these ideas out of theory and into action, translating principles into daily habits that can be started right now. Cayce never intended for his dietary advice to remain an inspiring idea on paper. He wanted it lived, felt in the body, experienced in the mind, and woven into the rhythm of each day. But he also understood that change can be overwhelming when it's sudden. For that reason, he often guided people to begin gradually, letting the body and habits adjust together until the new way felt as natural as breathing. The first step he recommended was awareness, not just of what you eat, but of how much of your plate is truly alkaline forming. For 1 week, he suggested, don't change anything yet, just observe. Write down your meals, note how you feel afterward, and notice whether your current pattern leans heavily toward acid-forming foods. This step alone can be revealing. When you see your daily intake in black and white, patterns become harder to ignore. Next came substitution, not deprivation. Rather than cutting everything bad all at once, Cayce would suggest swapping one acid-forming choice for an alkaline one at each meal. Morning toast could be replaced with fresh fruit, an afternoon pastry with a handful of raw almonds, a fried dinner side with steamed vegetables. These substitutions slowly shift the body's chemistry without triggering the resistance that comes from sudden restriction. He also encouraged a mealtime rhythm. Eat at roughly the same times each day, he advised, allowing the body to settle into a natural cycle of digestion and rest. This rhythm supports steady energy and gives the body space to process each meal fully before the next arrives. Hydration was to be integrated just as gently. For those unused to drinking much water, he suggested starting with 1 extra glass in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, building towards sipping consistently throughout the day. As hydration improves, many notice clearer thinking, steadier energy, and less craving for stimulants like coffee or sugar. Movement was another early action step. Cayce often told people to walk in the open at least once a day, even if only for a few minutes. Gentle, consistent movement keeps circulation active and supports the shift toward alkalinity by helping eliminate waste. Perhaps most importantly, Cayce emphasized listening to the body's response. After a week or two of these small changes, most people could feel the difference. Less heaviness after meals, fewer energy crashes, a clearer sense of well-being. This feedback, he believed, was the body's way of confirming that the new balance was working. He also urged patience. Do not expect in a week to overcome that which has been years in the making, he would caution. The body is a living system, and systems take time to realign. His guidance often spanned months, with gradual improvement leading to more profound, lasting changes. Once the basics were in place, the shift could deepen, moving closer to that 80% alkaline forming ideal, reducing the enemy foods to rare occasions, and developing a repertoire of meals that felt both satisfying and sustaining. This was not a sprint toward a fixed endpoint, but a steady walk toward a new normal. In this way, Cayce's plan became less of a diet and more of a practice, an ongoing dialogue between the choices we make and the body we live in. The more we practice, the clearer the connection becomes between what we eat and how we feel. And over time, this awareness extends beyond food, into sleep, stress, movement, and even relationships. Because balance in one area tends to invite balance in others. And yet, no matter how carefully we follow the plan, the key to sustaining it lies in an even deeper skill, learning to read the body's subtle signals and respond before imbalance takes hold. That's where Cayce's wisdom leads us next. Cayce often reminded people that no two bodies are identical, and that the most powerful health tool any person can develop is the ability to listen, really listen, to the signals their own body is sending. In his readings, he would describe aches, changes in skin tone, shifts in mood, and fluctuations in energy, not as random nuisances, but as coded messages about the body's internal balance. Learning to interpret these messages, he believed, was as important as following any diet plan. One of the first signals he pointed to was energy level. A body leaning toward alkalinity, he said, often felt light, steady, and clear-headed. In contrast, when acidity began to dominate, people might notice mid-afternoon slumps, morning grogginess that lingered despite adequate sleep, or bursts of energy followed by sharp crashes. These fluctuations weren't merely about getting older or having a busy day, they were signs of chemistry at work. Digestion was another key indicator. Regular, comfortable digestion suggested harmony. Bloating, excessive gas, heartburn, or constipation hinted at imbalance. Cayce often linked these discomforts to the overconsumption of acid-forming foods or poor combinations, like heavy meats with starchy sides that placed extra strain on the stomach and intestines. The skin could also serve as a mirror. In his view, when the body's elimination channels were overburdened, the skin often took on part of the work, leading to rashes, breakouts, or dullness. A glowing, even complexion was, to Cayce, a visible sign of good circulation and internal balance. He urged people to pay attention to mood and mental clarity. Irritability, restlessness, or a foggy mind could be the emotional counterparts of an acidic body state. Just as a polluted river can't run clear, a congested inner environment could cloud thought and dampen spirit. Many who followed his guidance reported not only physical improvements, but a lighter, calmer emotional state. Listening, in Cayce's sense, was not passive. It meant keeping a kind of internal journal, noting changes after altering a meal pattern, increasing hydration, or adjusting sleep. He encouraged people to treat their bodies like a trusted friend, asking, "How are you today?" and waiting for the honest answer, even if it came in the form of a mild ache or a restless night. This responsiveness was the difference between prevention and reaction. By noticing the earliest whispers of imbalance, a person could adjust, adding more alkaline-forming foods, reducing sugar, getting extra rest, before those whispers grew into the shouts of chronic illness. Modern health practices echo this approach. Self-monitoring, body awareness, and early intervention are core principles in preventive medicine. While lab tests and medical exams have their place, Cayce saw daily self-awareness as the front line of healthcare, an ongoing, intimate relationship with one's own body. He also acknowledged that listening to the body required honesty and humility. It was easy, he noted, to override subtle discomfort with excuses, stimulants, or distractions. But those who slowed down and respected what they felt could navigate their health far more effectively than those who ignored the signs until a crisis forced attention. And so, Cayce's diet was never just about the food. It was about cultivating an inner dialogue, a continual adjustment guided by the living feedback of your own system. When you know what balanced feels like, imbalance stands out clearly, and you can act before it takes root. Once this listening becomes habit, the 80-20 principle and the rest of his recommendations shift from being rules to being a natural expression of what feels right. And when that happens, you're no longer merely following a plan, you're living in the flow of health, which is exactly where our journey concludes. To live in what Cayce called the flow of health is to have harmony between what you eat, how you move, how you rest, and how you think. It's a state where choices are not made out of guilt or fear, but from an easy knowing of what nourishes you. In such a state, the 80-20 balance isn't a calculation you run at every meal. It's simply the way your plate tends to fill, the way your grocery basket naturally leans, the way your day unfolds without strain. Cayce envisioned this as a lifelong lifestyle, not a short-term fix. He spoke of it as building a foundation, one strong enough to weather seasons of stress, travel, or even illness without collapsing. That foundation was made of simple but profound practices. Filling the majority of your meals with fresh plant foods, keeping pure water close at hand, listening to the body's signals, and making small adjustments before imbalance could take hold. When people reached this point, he often noticed a shift in their language. They no longer spoke of trying to be healthy or sticking to a diet. Instead, they spoke of feeling right or being in tune. The change was not only physical, it was mental and emotional. Energy felt steady. Moods were more even. Sleep came easily. There was less struggle, more flow. He also saw that this lifestyle created resilience. A person living in the flow could enjoy a holiday meal, a rich dessert, or a special occasion without fear that it would undo their progress, because they knew how to return to balance the next day. This resilience came from the confidence that their health was not fragile, but supported by a strong, flexible system. In this way, Cayce's dietary wisdom was not about perfection. It was about relationship. Your relationship with food, with water, with movement, and with the signals of your own body. When those relationships are nurtured, they return the favor, providing vitality that lasts well beyond the momentary pleasure of any single meal. The long-term rewards were, in Cayce's eyes, far greater than the effort to reach them. He described people regaining not only physical capacity, but also a kind of joy, a lightness of spirit that comes when the body is no longer a source of constant complaint. This joy, he believed, was part of the true purpose of health, to free the mind and heart for living fully. And so, the journey through Cayce's guidance brings us back to where we began. The image of the body as a garden, tended daily with care, watered with pure intention, and planted with foods that restore, it will yield abundantly. Neglected, it will wither. The choice always rests with the gardener. Closing reflection. Edgar Cayce taught that health is not a secret locked away in complex treatments, but a living, breathing process in which we participate every day. By leaning toward alkalinity, feeding ourselves living foods, keeping the rivers of the body clear, and responding to the first signs of imbalance, we create a terrain where disease finds little room to grow. Perhaps the truest measure of success in this way of living is not the absence of illness, but the presence of vitality. Waking in the morning ready for the day, moving through life with steady energy, and feeling the quiet confidence that your body and spirit are working in harmony. Try it for a week, Cayce might say. Then for another. Let the proof be in how you feel, in the light in your eyes, in the steadiness of your step. In time, you may find that you're not just following a set of recommendations, you're living in the very flow of health he envisioned. And that, he would tell you, is the greatest remedy of all. Edgar Cayce believed that true health begins long before symptoms appear, and that what we eat each day is a conversation with the body, a conversation that can either cultivate vitality or invite imbalance. His emphasis on an alkaline-leaning diet, with fresh fruits and vegetables at its heart, was not about restriction, but restoration. By creating an internal environment that supports circulation, calms inflammation, and keeps the body's chemistry in harmony, we give ourselves the best chance at long-term wellness. In practical terms, his plan is simple. Make 80% of your diet alkaline-forming foods, fresh, colorful, alive. Let the remaining 20% include proteins, grains, and occasional treats, chosen with awareness. Drink pure water throughout the day, move your body gently but consistently, and pay attention to the subtle cues it sends. These small daily acts are the bricks in the foundation of resilience. What makes this approach timeless is its adaptability. Whether you live by the ocean or in the mountains, in a bustling city or a quiet village, the principles remain the same. You can adjust them to your culture, your tastes, your seasons. The core truth doesn't change. When you feed the body what it needs, it responds with strength and balance. Perhaps most importantly, Cayce saw health as a partnership. It is not something given by a doctor or taken from a pill. It's something you build with every choice you make. This partnership thrives on trust. Trust that your body is designed to heal, and trust in yourself to give it the conditions it needs. So here's the invitation. Try it for 7 days. Fill your plate with greens, fruits, and vibrant vegetables. Drink the water your cells have been waiting for. Notice the difference in your energy, your mood, your sleep. Write it down. At the end of the week, decide whether you want to keep going. Many who start find they don't want to go back because the change is not only visible, it's felt in every breath, every step. Cayce's voice still speaks through this guidance, even decades later. It says, "You have more influence over your health than you've been taught to believe. You can restore balance. You can tend the garden within. You can live in the flow of health, not as a dream, but as your daily reality." And as we close this journey, remember, each meal is a choice, each glass of water a step, each moment of awareness a seed planted in the soil of your well-being. Nourish it well and watch what grows.